Have you ever wondered why good people are often overlooked, while the cold and distant are the ones who get respected? It's not because they're stronger. It's because they make others fear losing them. Machiavelli once said, "It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both." Not to tell you to be cruel, but to make you face this brutal truth. Kindness without boundaries is just an invitation to be used. Patience without consequence is a signal for others to keep testing you. And presence that's too cheap will turn you into background noise. But tonight, everything changes. You're not here to learn how to be liked. You're here to learn how to become unignorable. In this journey, you will discover why silence at the right moment carries more weight than 1,000 explanations. Why scarcity makes you unforgettable, sometimes even obsessive in the minds of others. And why winners don't waste words. They simply know when to stay silent and when to strike. This isn't philosophy for bookshelves. This is survival strategy. You'll learn how to make your absence hit harder than your presence. How to turn no into the shield that protects your value. And how to walk into any room without saying a word, yet change the atmosphere completely. Because from now on, you're no longer predictable. You become the event. You become the standard. You become the person they cannot afford to lose. You weren't destroyed by your enemies. You were dismantled by the ones who smiled, by the ones who said, "I carry," right before they took something from you, by those who praised your patience as they tested its limits. And when it hurt, you stayed quiet because that's what you were taught to do. You believed being good would protect you. That showing up, forgiving, explaining, would one day be enough. But it wasn't. It only taught them one thing. You'd never leave. You weren't weak. You were predictable, too available, too readable. And in a world where attention is currency, you made yourself cheap. That's the bitter truth. The world doesn't respect the ones who are always there. It respects the ones who know how to leave without warning, without explanation, without fear. Machiavelli never told you to be cruel. He told you to be untouchable, unpredictable, unignorable. He warned, the kind-hearted, without boundaries, are not admired, they're consumed. And you kept showing up, even when it cost you everything. You thought your presence was love, but to them, it became background noise. So now you're here, not because you're soft, but because you've reached your limit. And something inside you, the part you've buried for years, is waking up. The silence you once used to avoid conflict is about to become your greatest weapon, because power doesn't live in kindness alone. It lives in the moment they feel your absence and flinch. There's a kind of pain no one ever talks about. It leaves no bruises. It doesn't scream. It doesn't bleed. It just waits. It's in the smile you fake when someone interrupts you again. In the way you say "I'm fine" while your chest tightens like a vice. It's the pause before you speak. The silence after they ignore you. The 1,000 quiet moments when you swallow your truth just to avoid making others uncomfortable. You didn't choose invisibility. You were trained into it. They called it being mature, easygoing, understanding. But what they really meant was, you're convenient. You don't make us deal with your humanity. So you stayed silent, smiling when you wanted to scream, giving when you were empty, apologizing for taking up space even when no one asked you to. And the worst part, they didn't even notice. Because pain like this doesn't collapse in public. It blends in. It wears your face. It picks up the phone, shows up early, stays late. And when it finally breaks, it does so in silence. You thought being low maintenance made you lovable? That if you made their lives easier, they'd hold on tighter. But all it did was train them to expect you without effort. You became predictable. And predictable people don't get protected. They get used. You never exploded. You never raised your voice. You just disappeared a little each day. Until one morning, you looked in the mirror and realized you weren't angry. You weren't broken. You were just fading. The death of the dependable isn't loud. It's slow. It's quiet. It's the erosion of someone who gave too much for too long without ever being asked how they were doing. But here's the part no one warns you about. You taught them. You trained them. Every time you stayed quiet. Every time you forgave without a consequence. Every time you made peace instead of making truth. You thought love would come if you just kept showing up, but it didn't. Because love that ignores your limits isn't love. It's consumption. It's convenience. It's control. Wearing a gentle face. And that little voice inside the one you've been shushing for years. It's getting louder. It's not asking anymore. It's warning you. Enough. Enough bleeding in silence. Enough shrinking to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. Enough explaining pain to people who benefit from your confusion. Because something is changing now. Not in them. In you. You no longer want to be the one who always understands. You want to be understood without begging. You want space without justifying it. You want to be missed, not expected. And here's what happens when that shift begins. You stop answering texts that feel like traps. You stop saying it's okay when it's not. You stop softening your voice to avoid sounding too much. You stop handing out your presence like a free trial to people who never subscribed to your worth in the first place. And they'll notice. Not because you yell. Not because you fight. But because you stop dancing around their comfort. Your silence becomes expensive. Your distance becomes a question, and your absence becomes the first time they realize they were never entitled to you. Machiavelli said, "It is better to be feared than loved." If you cannot be both, not because fear is power, but because fear means consequence. And consequence is what finally makes people reconsider how they treat you. So, no? You're not cruel. You're clear. You're done negotiating your worth in whispers. You're done training people to forget your fire. Because the version of you that was always available just died. And the one replacing it doesn't chase, doesn't explain, doesn't return just because they finally noticed you were gone. If they keep crossing your boundaries, it's not always because they're cruel. It's because they were never shown they existed. Because you were never taught to build them. From the moment you could speak, you were praised for being agreeable, smiled at when you stayed quiet, rewarded for being easy, called mature when you swallowed pain without blinking. You didn't become soft by chance. You were shaped into it, sculpted by a culture that fears directness and punishes clarity. They trained you not to be strong. They trained you to be tolerable. You were taught to avoid tension, to bend, to be digestible, to give not with discernment, but with obedience. But here's the problem. When you become too easy to digest, people consume you without ever tasting your worth. They won't remember your patience. They won't cherish your silence. They'll just keep reaching for more because your lack of resistance tells them it's safe to take. This isn't just social. This is systemic. You learn the rules early. Don't speak too loud. Don't take up too much space. Don't make others uncomfortable even when they're hurting you. This is not a personality trait. This is programming. You were taught that goodness means surrender. That value means being needed. That love means never causing conflict. And now, you walk into rooms like an apology. You speak not to express truth, but to avoid offense. You offer yourself in fragments, hoping someone will assemble you into something lovable. But Machiavelli knew better. Centuries ago, he wrote the line, "No one wants to admit today, men are quick to forget benefits, but slow to forget injuries. They don't remember your kindness. They remember your silence. They remember how easy it was to ignore you, how free your forgiveness came, how low the cost was to hurt you. Because we're not as evolved as we pretend. Behind suits and smartphones and pleasantries, we're still animals, drawn to strength, wired for hierarchy. And unconsciously, we test people not with cruelty, but with calculation. Can I take from them without paying a price? And if the answer is yes, they will. Not because they're evil, but because systems reward takers, families, corporations, classrooms. They elevate the bold and forget the quiet givers. Look around. The loud get heard. The confident get chosen. The ruthless get respected because their standards make others uncomfortable. And the kind-hearted, they get told to wait, to be grateful, to keep giving, to be patient for recognition that never comes. This is not morality. This is machinery. And unless you break it, it will break you. That's why Machiavelli never preached purity. He preached perception. Power isn't about being loved. It's about being felt. It's about walking into a room and shifting the temperature without raising your voice. So, here's the shift. Stop begging to be understood in a system that only respects power. Start becoming unreadable. Start becoming undeniable. Start becoming unconsumable. You don't need to shout. You don't need to fight. You just need to stop handing out your peace like candy. Because when your presence is always available, your absence means nothing. But when you reclaim your energy, when your silence becomes deliberate, when your time feels expensive, when your gaze is no longer seeking approval, they feel it. Suddenly, they wonder, what changed? Why does the air feel different? And that's when the recalibration begins. Not because you demanded respect, but because you became the kind of person who no longer offers their essence for free. So if they keep crossing your boundaries, stop asking what's wrong with them and start asking what you've been tolerating too long. Because morality without strength becomes martyrdom, and patience without limits becomes a playground for the cruel. Machiavelli's harshest truth wasn't about war or politics. It was this. The promise given was a necessity of the past. The word broken is a necessity of the present. In other words, don't expect others to honor your kindness unless they feel the weight of disappointing you. So the next time someone wonders, do they like me? Make sure the better question is, do they fear losing me? You don't need to be cruel to lose respect. You just need to be too easy to reach, too always there, too quick to respond, too afraid to draw a line. Most people think invisibility happens when you stay quiet, but often it happens when you speak too much, show up too fast, give too soon, and suddenly you disappear, not because you shrank, but because they stopped seeing you. You thought your loyalty would earn you reverence, but it only taught them one thing. You'll show up, no matter how they treat you. That's not love. That's predictability. And predictable people are rarely protected. They're managed until they're no longer useful. Let's break this down. Mistake number 1, overexposure. You thought visibility meant value, so you kept showing up, texting first, checking in, explaining yourself in paragraphs, letting them know they're always on your mind. But Machiavelli warned a prince must learn to conceal his intentions. Why? Because the second someone can read your entire soul like an open book, they stop opening the pages Mystery creates gravity. Predictability creates boredom. The most respected people, they're not constantly accessible. They're intentional with presence. And in doing so, they become rare. Reversal. You thought availability made you feel close. It only made your presence easier to take for granted. Mistake number 2, believing good intentions are enough. You meant well. You gave because you cared. You forgave because you valued peace. But here's the brutal truth. People don't respond to what you meant. They respond to how you made them feel about themselves. If your kindness made them feel safe, they'll admire you. If it made them feel guilty, they'll resent you. If it made them feel superior, they'll use you. Intention is invisible. Perception is everything. Reversal. You thought your sincerity would be understood. It wasn't, because you were speaking the language of loyalty to people fluent in convenience. Mistake number 3. Giving before you're valued. You wanted to connect, to be trusted, to be chosen. So you gave first. Your time, your attention, your vulnerability, hoping they'd give back once they saw your heart. But humans don't work that way. We don't value what's free. We value what costs us something. Machiavelli understood this well. He never said don't give. He said give with strategy. Give when it builds trust, not when it buys hope. Reversal. You thought generosity would inspire reciprocity, but without standards, it just inspired entitlement. Mistake number 4. Avoiding conflict to preserve peace. You feared that drawing a boundary would push them away. So you stayed quiet, smiled through the tension, made excuses for their disrespect, chose comfort over confrontation again. But what you didn't realize is that every time you avoid a necessary conflict, you destroy the relationship just a little slower. Machiavelli would call that a betrayal. Not of them, of yourself. Men ought either to be well treated or crushed, because in the middle lies manipulation. Reversal. You thought silence was keeping the peace. It wasn't. It was keeping them comfortable with crossing your line. Now here's what most good people don't realize. The world doesn't honor invisible sacrifice. It forgets it. You think your endless patience makes you strong. But to them, it just means you'll never leave. You think being the bigger person makes you worthy. But they've learned you'll carry the weight of their mistakes too. You thought they'd finally see your value, but you were training them to look away. So here's your pivot point. Stop giving love as a strategy. Stop using kindness as currency. Stop offering loyalty without leverage. Make your silence mean something. Make your forgiveness conditional. Make your presence felt like a rare privilege, not a routine. Because the moment you stop offering the best of you to people who haven't earned it, is the moment they stop assuming it's theirs by default. Strength isn't always loud. It doesn't always come wrapped in muscles or medals. Sometimes it's quiet, cold, sharp like a blade hidden behind still eyes. You've been told your whole life that goodness would protect you, that if you gave enough, stayed soft enough, forgave often enough, they'd value you. But they didn't. Not because you weren't good, but because you were predictable. In a world driven by perception, what people can predict, they stop respecting. You made yourself easy to read, easy to reach, easy to use. You tried to be the light, but no one ever taught you the value of shadow, of boundaries, of consequence, because that's where power lives. Not in how much you love, but in what you'll never tolerate again. Not in how many chances you give, but in the weight of your silence when you're done. They told you to be kind, but they forgot to teach you how to be dangerous. Not to others, but to the systems that keep draining you. There is a version of you, buried beneath politeness, beneath self-doubt, beneath the need to be liked, And that version, it doesn't ask to be respected. It simply is. It walks into a room and changes the temperature without saying a word. It doesn't overshare. It doesn't explain. It doesn't flinch when someone questions its worth. Because it's no longer trying to be understood. It's done performing for approval. See, real power isn't about domination. It's about ownership of your mind, your time, your voice. And to own those things, you'll need to reclaim parts of yourself. You were told to hide your anger, not as rage, but as boundary. Your silence, not as fear, but as consequence. Your solitude, not as emptiness, but as self-respect. The people who rise in this world aren't always the kindest. They're the clearest. The ones who know how to hold their energy. The ones who don't explain their distance, they embody it. Because when you're calm and unreadable and still undeniably felt, you stop being an option. You start being a presence. So if you're tired of being overlooked, it's not because you're not enough. It's because you haven't let them feel what it means to lose you. And maybe now, you finally understand. It's not about being feared or loved. It's about being respected. And respect doesn't come from softness. It comes from clarity, from weight, from becoming someone they can no longer afford to misunderstand. Change never begins in the hands. It starts in the mind. In that small, quiet voice that finally dares to ask, what if I've been wrong about everything I thought made me worthy? You believed if you were kind enough, calm enough, patient enough, they'd see your heart. But they didn't. Because worth isn't proven by how much you give. It's revealed by what you refuse to tolerate. You weren't overlooked because you were weak. You were overlooked because you were too available to be noticed. Too soft to be feared. Too forgiving to be felt. They didn't see your value because you trained them not to. That's the hardest truth to swallow. Every it's okay when it wasn't. Every smile to keep the peace. Every second chance you handed out, without earning one back, was a lesson. You taught them your silence had no consequence. Your love had no boundary. And your presence had no price. But here's the shift. You stop asking, do they like me? And start asking, do I like who I become around them? You stop begging to stay, and start deciding who deserves access at all. You stop seeing rejection as failure. You start seeing it as filtering. Because now, your peace costs something. Your time isn't on clearance. Your love isn't a discount. You don't give because you're afraid to lose people. You give because someone proved they're safe to receive it. And if they're not, you walk calmly, quietly, without slamming doors, without leaving notes. You just disappear. Because the new you doesn't need closure. The new you is the closure. That's what happens when clarity replaces desperation. You stop auditioning for roles in stories that shrink you. You stop solving red flags like puzzles. You stop translating disrespect into maybe they're just hurting. You stop explaining your standards like they're a crime. And suddenly, they notice the silence. They feel your absence. They replay every moment trying to find the one where they lost access to you. And you don't even look back. Because this is what strength looks like now. Not louder, not meaner, just unavailable to what once drained you. Philosophy means nothing if it never touches your spine. Knowing isn't enough. Power has to be lived. So here's how it begins. Stop over-explaining. You don't owe anyone your reasons. Let your no stand without decoration. Let your silence say what your words use to beg for. Next time someone asks, why didn't you reply? Let the pause answer for you. Let the quiet feel heavier than any explanation ever could. Make your words expensive. Don't speak to be liked. Speak to be felt. Every word should cost something. Every pause should carry tension. You don't need to talk more. You need to talk less and mean more. When you speak, let it shift the room. R. Control your body before the room. Power walks slowly. Power doesn't fidget. Power holds eye contact. 1 second longer than comfort allows. Your presence should say, I don't need to prove anything. I just am. Because the body speaks before the mouth. Make sure it speaks with stillness. Not desperation. See. Disengage without drama. Not every insult needs a reply. Not every battle needs your fire. When they test you, don't react. Don't explain. Don't justify. Just finish. Quietly. Fully. Let the silence choke them. They won't remember what you said. They'll remember that you said nothing and never returned. Woo. Raise the price of access. Your time is not cheap. Your peace is not public property. Your heart is not a donation box. Before you let someone in, ask, do they bring clarity or chaos? Respect or excuses? Because if they cost you your peace, they were too expensive from the start. Luke, give like a strategist, not a savior. Giving isn't weakness. But giving without discernment is dangerous. Don't give to prove you're good. Give to reward what's proven to be loyal. Give from fullness, not from fear. If there's no overflow, wait. Sometimes, silence is the most generous thing you can offer. Here's the truth no one wants to say. You don't need to fight. You don't need to threaten. You don't even need to speak. You just need to disappear from where you're disrespected. And when you return, if you do, make sure it's not out of guilt. Make sure it's because they've changed, or you've outgrown needing them to. Because real power, it's not in what you control. It's in what no longer controls you. Strength doesn't look the way it used to. It's not raised voices, not fists on the table, not yelling to be heard. Real strength is quieter now. It walks in and changes the air. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't chase attention. It doesn't need to be understood to be felt. This kind of strength doesn't beg. It doesn't explain. It doesn't perform softness to stay accepted. It just exists. Fully. Unapologetically. Undeniably. They used to ignore your boundaries. Now they hesitate before speaking. They used to forget your value. Now they flinch in your absence. You don't need to convince them anymore. You just leave and let silence do what words never could. Not because you're cruel, but because you're done. You've forgiven things that should have been remembered. You've stayed when you should have walked. You've swallowed shame like water and called it grace. But not anymore. Now, your silence isn't fear. It's consequence. Now, your gaze isn't pleading. It's discerning. Now, your absence isn't rejection. It's a message access denied. This is the new face of strength. A man who no longer raises his voice because his presence already speaks. A woman who no longer explains because her silence now draws lines they won't dare cross. A soul who no longer fears solitude because solitude has become sacred. They don't slam doors. They don't send long texts. They don't ask for closure. They just vanish. And the world adjusts, because nothing terrifies a manipulator more than someone they can no longer read. No longer bent. No longer reach. You used to be available. Now, you are rare. You used to overgive. Now, you offer nothing that isn't earned. And they feel it. In the space you once filled. In the calm you once offered. In the warmth they took for granted. You don't want revenge. You want silence. You want peace without having to bleed for it. And now, you have it. Because love, without self-respect, isn't love. It's dependency. Kindness without consequence isn't kindness. It's permission. And forgiveness without standards isn't healing. It's self-erasure. So, if your heart is beating slower now, if your mind feels heavier, that's not fear. That's memory. That's the version of you waking up. The one who stopped apologizing. The one who doesn't need to be saved, only remembered. Because from now on, you're not the one who stays. You're the one they regret losing. You weren't weak. You were just unguarded. You weren't invisible. You were just surrounded by people who couldn't see anyone they didn't control. You weren't too much. You were just in the wrong rooms, trying to stay small enough to be held. But that version of you, the one who kept bleeding quietly, for people who never even asked if you were okay, is done. You no longer soften to be chosen. You no longer explain to be understood. You no longer stay, just because they noticed you're gone. From this moment forward, you will not trade your dignity for connection. You will not lower your standards to avoid being alone. You will not apologize for the cost of access to your life, because your peace is expensive. Your silence is heavy. Your love is sacred. And your absence will be felt like a door closing slowly, with no explanation. They didn't hate you. They just never feared losing you. And that is what changes now. Let them adjust to your distance. Let them wonder what happened. Let them replay the silence again and again. Because the new you doesn't need applause, doesn't need validation, doesn't need to be invited back in. You are the invitation. You are the standard. You are not here to be liked. You are here to be remembered. In your absence, this isn't a performance anymore. This is a declaration. You are no longer accessible. You are no longer explainable. You are no longer bendable. You are sovereign. And from this point on, the world either respects that or gets replaced by it. It's not that people don't respect you. It's that you've never made them pay for disrespecting you. Have you ever felt invisible? Like you're in the room, but no one truly sees you. Like your voice enters the air, but leaves no echo. You hold the door open. You remember birthdays. You stay up late to listen to their pain. You forgive what no one else would, and yet they forget you first. You try to be kind. You try to be reasonable. You try to keep the peace. But the more you give, the more they overlook you. And then the questions start creeping in. Why do rude people get more respect? Why do the cold and distant get taken more seriously than the loyal and kind? Why is it always the good one who's ignored first and blamed last? The answer isn't pretty, and it's not fair. But it's ancient and brutally honest. Machiavelli said it best. It is better to be feared than loved if one must choose. Because the world doesn't respect predictability. It doesn't admire those who fold quietly. It doesn't listen to people who never make others pause. You can be the kindest person in the room, soft-spoken, thoughtful, understanding. But if you never make anyone think twice before crossing you, you're not strong. And because you're not strong, you're not respected. Now let's be clear. This isn't a call to become cruel. This isn't an invitation to dominate or destroy. This is a wake-up call for anyone being slowly erased by the confusion between kindness and weakness. Because if you never learn how to be feared, your gentleness becomes a discount sign, a quiet permission slip for others to take advantage of you. Here's the truth. You're not disrespected because you're kind. You're disrespected because your kindness has no consequence, because your boundaries are invisible, because your no is negotiable, because you've made it too easy to be ignored. This video won't flatter you. It won't comfort you. It won't help you be liked more. It exists for one reason: to help you become the kind of person no one dares to underestimate. Because from Machiavelli's time until now, one truth has never changed. People don't respect the agreeable. They respect the one they can't afford to disregard. And if you're still watching, you already feel this in your bones. It's time to stop living a life where the nicer you are, the more you bleed. Let's begin the first chapter. Let's get honest. There is a kind of pain that doesn't scream. It doesn't show up in dramatic outbursts or loud breakdowns. It lives quietly. It hides behind smiles, behind helpfulness, behind phrases like, "It's okay, don't worry about it." This pain is not physical. It's psychological erosion. The kind that happens when you shrink yourself just a little bit, every single day, so others can feel more comfortable around you. You know the feeling. You hold back a boundary because you don't want to cause tension. You let that joke slide. Again, because you don't want to be too sensitive. You nod when you disagree. You smile when you're hurt. You stay when everything in you wants to walk away. And slowly, you vanish, piece by piece, silently, voluntarily, until one day, you look in the mirror and realize you didn't become invisible by accident. You became invisible by design. This is the hidden pain Machiavelli never wrote about directly, but it's buried deep inside his warnings. Because when you live like this, when your entire existence is built around pleasing, adapting, smoothing over, avoiding confrontation, you become exactly the kind of person the world loves to use, but never truly respects. The world doesn't reward softness without strength. It exploits it. People may call you nice. They may say they appreciate your kindness. But when it matters, when push comes to shove, they don't listen to you. They don't fear losing you. They don't think twice before crossing your line because you never showed them where the line even was. And here's where the shame creeps in. Because deep down, you already know this. You feel the sting every time your voice is ignored in a group. You feel the flush of humiliation when someone interrupts you and no one notices. You feel the silence after you express a need and it's met with indifference. You tell yourself, maybe I'm too much. Maybe I'm overreacting. But you're not. You're just finally noticing a pattern that's been there all along. The more you avoid making others uncomfortable, the more uncomfortable your life becomes. And that is the pain no one talks about. Because it's not easy to admit that maybe the reason you're treated as replaceable is because you've trained people to believe you always will be. No one respects what costs them nothing. No one values what always bends. And maybe no one told you this before, so let me be the first. You're allowed to be respected. But only if you stop making yourself so easy to disregard. Machiavelli knew that power wasn't about domination, it was about presence. A prince who cannot assert himself is not respected, no matter how noble his intentions. And you right now are living like a kingdom without walls, wide open, undefended, begging not to be attacked. But here's the brutal truth. The world doesn't protect what will not protect itself. Respect doesn't come to those who plead for it. It comes to those who become it. So the question is no longer, why don't they respect me? The question is, when did I decide that being liked was more important than being respected? Because that's where the pain began. Not in what they did to you, but in what you allowed because you were too afraid to be misunderstood. And if you don't face that pain now, if you don't name it, confront it, transform it, it will shape your entire life in silence. You'll build friendships that drain you, relationships that depend on your silence, careers where you're constantly overlooked, and at the center of it all, a person who gave everything, but never received what mattered most: respect. Not fear-based domination, not applause, just the quiet, powerful understanding. This person knows who they are, and I'd better think twice before treating them carelessly. That is where we begin. Not by demanding respect, but by unlearning the reflex of surrender. In the next part, we'll expose the deeper psychological mechanism that keeps this pain alive and why. No matter how hard you try to be good, you'll keep getting hurt until something fundamental changes inside. You weren't born weak. You were trained to be, trained to please, trained to smile, trained to flinch at conflict, and apologize for simply existing. From a young age, you were conditioned by family, by school, by culture to believe that being good means being quiet, being adaptable, being easy to manage. You were rewarded for obedience, not strength, for saying yes, not no, for staying small, not standing tall. And so, you learned discomfort is dangerous, anger is ugly, saying I don't agree is a threat to connection. But here's the trap. The more you suppress your edge, your fire, your natural instinct to protect yourself, the more you signal to the world I am safe to ignore. And the world is always watching. Because society doesn't operate on your intentions. It operates on your projection, your posture, your tone, your structure. You can have the purest heart, the best intentions, the deepest empathy, but if your body language says, I won't fight back, then people, consciously or not, will treat you accordingly. Because the truth is brutal. People don't respond to your goodness. They respond to your strength. Machiavelli understood this. He knew the stability of a nation or of a man depends not on how kind or fair it tries to be, but on whether it has the internal power to enforce its boundaries. He wrote, "A republic that becomes corrupted and loses internal discipline cannot survive, even with good laws." Now apply that to your life. It doesn't matter how many self-help books you read. It doesn't matter how many affirmations you say in the mirror. If your emotional foundation is cracked, if you collapse the moment someone pushes back, then your kindness will always be mistaken for weakness. Why? Because strength isn't about standing tall when things are easy. It's about staying centered when everything is testing you. And life is always testing you. Every ignored message, every boundary pushed, every moment someone disrespects you, it's a test, a subtle one. And every time you let it slide, every time you justify it, every time you swallow the no burning in your throat, you fail that test. Not morally, psychologically. You teach others, and more dangerously, you teach yourself that your voice doesn't matter, that your needs are negotiable, that peace is more important than self-respect. But here's the paradox. The longer you choose peace at the cost of your dignity, the more you lose both. You think being easy makes you lovable, but the people you quietly admire, the ones who command the room, they aren't easy. They have edges, they have weight, they have presence. And that presence doesn't come from being nice. It comes from having a structure inside them that doesn't collapse when pressure hits. That's the deeper mechanism. You're not weak because of what people did to you. You're weak because no one taught you how to hold your own power. And power isn't aggression. It's not loud. It's not explosive. It's the quiet conviction of someone who has faced themselves fully and decided, this is who I am. And here is where I draw the line. That's what people respond to. Not desperation, not charm, not awe and kindness, but clarity, unshakable clarity. So let me ask you, what structure have you built inside? When someone questions your worth, do you collapse? Or do you reveal the foundation you've already laid? Because if your values shift based on who's watching, if your peace depends on someone else's mood, if your voice changes depending on the room, then no matter how wise or kind you are, you'll still be dismissed. Not because you're not good, but because you're not grounded. And grounding, real grounding, requires that you face the one thing most people run from: discomfort. Because only when you stop fearing discomfort can you finally start choosing integrity over approval. Only then can your no carry weight. Only then can your silence become a statement. Only then does your presence command respect. In the next part, we'll explore why this structure fails for so many. The 4 common mistakes that keep people trapped in cycles of being used, overlooked, and quietly resented. Because no matter how much you try to do everything right, if you're not respected, you're still losing. Let's be honest. You've probably done everything they told you to do. Be nice. Be patient. Be understanding. Always give the benefit of the doubt. Don't make a scene. Don't be too much. Don't upset anyone. And yet, despite following all the rules, you're still disrespected. You're still the one who gets ignored in group settings. Still the one who gets taken advantage of in relationships. Still the one who bends, compromises, softens your truth, only to be discarded the moment you stop giving. Why? Because the rules were never designed to protect you. They were designed to control you. Let's break it down. Mistake number 1. Believing that being liked is the same as being respected. It's not. Being liked is emotional. Being respected is structural. People like things that make them feel good, but they respect things that have weight, that hold firm, that don't shift with the wind. You can be charming, funny, compassionate, and still be ignored the moment you say something inconvenient. Because when you train people to like you more than they fear losing you, you lose leverage. And what's the consequence? They adore your warmth, but they walk all over your boundaries. Mistake number 2. Thinking that silence equals maturity. You've been told to stay calm. Don't react. Rise above it. But silence without consequence isn't wisdom. It's passivity in disguise. Every time you let a boundary be crossed in silence, you're not being noble. You're training the world to ignore your limits. Because boundaries, without enforcement, are just suggestions. Respect doesn't grow in the absence of reaction. It grows when silence is paired with presence, with weight, with quiet certainty that says, I saw that, and it won't happen again. And if it does, there will be a cost. Mistake number 3. Believing you can earn respect by giving more love, more patience, more second chances. But here's the truth. Respect is never earned by overgiving. It's earned by knowing when to stop. Every time you give past your capacity, you dilute your value. Every time you forgive too quickly, you signal that your standards are negotiable. Every time you keep showing up for people who wouldn't even notice if you disappeared, you're not being loyal. You're being available to your own erasure. Machiavelli warned about this in politics, but it applies just as much to your relationships. A prince who is overly generous will exhaust his resources, be taken for granted, and lose both wealth and reputation. Now ask yourself, have you exhausted your emotional resources? And what reputation has that earned you? Because generosity, without limits, leads to depletion, not respect. Mistake number 4, confusing empathy with self-abandonment. You tell yourself you're understanding, that you see the good in people, that you want to give second chances, that you don't want to be harsh. But deep down, you know the truth. You're not being understanding. You're just afraid to draw a line. And every time you swallow your needs in the name of being compassionate, you betray yourself a little more. Compassion without boundaries isn't love. It's self-erasure in a nicer outfit. So let's be clear. You're not weak because you care. You're not disrespected because you're kind. You're disrespected because you keep making these 4 critical mistakes. You confuse being liked with being respected. You mistake silence for maturity. You think overgiving will earn you loyalty. And you abandon yourself in the name of empathy. These are not moral failures. They're learned patterns. But if you want to break them, you need something stronger than willpower. You need a new philosophy, a deeper framework. That's where Machiavelli comes in. Not the cartoon villain version that people quote out of context, but the real thinker. The one who understood power not as cruelty, but as clarity. Not as domination, but as direction. In the next part, we'll explore the core of his philosophy, the foundation beneath true respect, and why you must learn to be feared if you ever want to be truly free. Let's strip away the noise. Machiavelli was never about evil. He wasn't telling you to manipulate others just to win. What he offered was something far more uncomfortable and far more powerful. A confrontation with reality. Because in the real world, not the one built on slogans and wishful thinking, power is not granted to the soft-spoken. Influence does not go to the most virtuous. And respect, it does not follow goodness. It follows clarity, consistency, and consequence. Machiavelli didn't invent these truths. He simply dared to say them out loud. It is better to be feared than loved. If one cannot be both. This phrase is often misunderstood, taken as a green light for cruelty. But read it again, slowly. It's not a command. It's a warning. If you must choose, choose the one that guarantees you won't be disregarded. Because love can be fickle. Love can fade. People love what is convenient, but they respect what they cannot ignore, what carries weight, what doesn't bend. This is what modern life gets wrong. We raise generations to chase acceptance, to believe that if you're good enough, soft enough, patient enough, the world will love you back. But the world does not reward emotional vulnerability unless it's paired with internal power. And without that power, you become an open gate. Nice, agreeable, exhausted, forgotten. The true foundation of Machiavelli's philosophy is not domination, it's structure. He understood what modern psychology confirms. People don't respond to who you are inside. They respond to how clearly you express your boundaries on the outside. If you want to build that kind of structure, you need 3 things. 1. Moral clarity, not performative morality, not surface-level niceness, but deep clarity around what you will and will not accept, what you will stand for quietly, fiercely, even when no one is watching. Machiavelli wrote about princes and republics, but replace those words with your life, your body, your mind. If you do not have laws for yourself, if you are not the sovereign over your own decisions, then you're not leading your life. You're reacting to it. 2. Emotional discipline. Most people are slaves to their feelings. 1 minute, they're clear and proud. The next, they're begging for validation. But you cannot build respect on emotional volatility. Machiavelli warned, those who do not master themselves will inevitably be mastered by others. You must become the one who chooses his response, not the one who collapses into it. This doesn't mean becoming cold. It means becoming grounded, not controlled by mood, but directed by principle. 3. Strategic presence. In a world full of noise, your presence must speak louder than your words. That means knowing when to speak and when to remain still. It means understanding. You don't need to explain yourself to everyone. Sometimes, silence is the most intimidating form of power. A well-timed no is more commanding than 100 apologies. You've seen this. The people you quietly admire, they don't beg for approval. They don't perform their goodness. They don't flinch when others feel uncomfortable. Why? Because they're not afraid to be misunderstood. They're not confused about who they are. That is what Machiavelli offered us. A roadmap to sovereign self-respect. Not the kind you demand from others, but the kind you build in silence and emanate without effort. So ask yourself, where are you morally unclear? Where are you emotionally undisciplined? Where does your presence disappear instead of shape the room? Because these are not personality flaws. They are structural absences. And what is empty gets filled by the world's agenda, not your own. In the next part, we begin the shift, the psychological transformation. How do you take this philosophy, these truths, and not just understand them, but let them change the way you show up in the world? It begins not with more effort, but with a complete reset of how you think. You can't solve a problem with the same mindset that created it. And you can't be respected while still thinking like someone desperate to be accepted. That's the first fracture that must occur. You must stop chasing approval and start building identity. Because as long as you walk into rooms wondering, will they like me? You've already given your power away. You've placed your worth outside of yourself, handed over to strangers like loose change. That has to end, and the ending begins here. Respect doesn't come from performance. It comes from presence. And presence, it begins with internal certainty. Most people never develop that. Why? Because they confuse self-worth with emotional reactions. They say things like, I feel confident today, or I feel insecure right now. But confidence built on mood is not confidence. It's emotional weather. It changes without warning. Machiavelli never relied on the weather. He taught us something timeless: to lead, to rule. To be taken seriously, you must be anchored. You must know who you are even when your voice shakes, even when your heart races, even when the room goes cold and all eyes turn toward you with judgment. Because here's what most people never realize. Respect isn't about how you're perceived. It's about how stable you are under pressure. People are drawn to consistency, to structure, to energy. That doesn't collapse when tension enters the room. But most of us, we've been trained by culture, trauma, and upbringing to adapt instead of assert, to please instead of declare, to survive instead of lead. And so, we end up reacting to life instead of shaping it. Let's get brutally honest. If your values change based on who you're with, if your tone changes depending on how much approval you want, if your body language shrinks around dominant people, you are not free. You are still living as a psychological mirror, reflecting the energy around you instead of projecting the energy within you. The shift begins with a new question. Who am I when I'm no longer performing? Who are you when you stop smiling to be polite? Who are you when you stop explaining yourself just to feel safe? Who are you when you stop apologizing for simply taking up space? Because that version of you, raw, unpolished, undiluted, that version is the one who deserves to be respected. But they can't emerge until the performer dies. And that death, it's uncomfortable, because the people who benefited from your compliance, they will resist. They'll say you've changed. They'll say you've become cold, distant, arrogant. Let them. Because here's the psychological turning point. You must become willing to disappoint the world in order to stop disappointing yourself. This is not ego. This is sovereignty. It's the moment you stop asking, how do I make them like me? And start asking, how do I become someone I respect, no matter who's watching? This is what makes the difference between someone who fades into the background and someone whose silence is felt. The moment they walk into a room, Machiavelli would call this virtue. Not virtue in the moral sense, but in the structural sense. The force of inner presence, the energy of someone who knows their own weight. And this is what you must start building now. Not louder opinions, not more people-pleasing strategies, but a core identity that is unchangeable, under pressure. One that doesn't shift to be liked. One that doesn't fracture to avoid discomfort. One that doesn't vanish when eyes are on you. In the next part, we'll break this shift down into real-world action. What does it look like concretely to live with this kind of presence? Because ideas are just smoke without embodiment. And the shift means nothing if you don't carry it into every conversation, boundary, and moment of your life. Theory means nothing until it survives contact with reality. You can read Machiavelli. You can meditate on presence. You can talk about sovereignty, boundaries, power. But until you walk into a room and act differently, none of it matters. The transformation begins in your posture, in your tone, in your silence. Because presence isn't declared, it's felt. Here's what it looks like concretely when someone starts living from internal power instead of external approval. 1. You stop over-explaining. Weakness often hides behind too many words. When you're unsure of your worth, you try to justify everything. Every no needs a reason. Every decision becomes a debate. Every truth you carry is served with disclaimers. But someone who knows who they are doesn't beg to be understood. They say what they mean, then stop talking. It's not rudeness, it's weight. And that silence, that pause, it creates space. It creates tension. It creates presence. The room listens because you don't need them to. 2. You enforce boundaries with action, not emotion. Here's a secret. People don't take your boundaries seriously because they've never seen you defend them. You talk about needing space. You say, please don't speak to me like that. But when someone crosses the line, you hesitate. You second guess. You forgive too fast. That's why they don't listen. Because there's no consequence. A boundary isn't real until it costs you something to enforce it. Until you're willing to walk away from comfort, from convenience, even from people you care about, because you refuse to shrink anymore. 3. You stop negotiating your standards. Most people live by vibes, not values. Their morals shift based on the moment. Their energy changes depending on who's in the room. They hold principles until they're tested. But to be respected, Your values must become immovable. Not loud, not preachy, just constant, silent, inflexible. And when people realize you don't bend just to keep peace, they either rise to meet you or they leave. Either way, you win. 4. You make no your baseline, not your exception. Too many people say yes by default, then collapse from resentment. You agree to favors, stay in conversations too long, let energy vampires through the door because you were just being polite. But someone who lives with presence, they lead with no, not as a weapon, but as a filter. Not everyone deserves your time. Not every conversation needs your input. Not every opportunity is aligned with your path. And if you can't say no with calm conviction, your yes means nothing. 5. You speak last and not often. In rooms filled with noise, the one who waits, commands. You've seen this. The person who doesn't rush to speak, who listens, who watches, who waits until the tension has built, and then says something that silences the room. That's not luck. It's emotional leverage. Machiavelli understood this well. The wise man does in the beginning what the fool does in the end. Most people speak to be seen. Few speak because their words carry the weight of thought. You don't need to dominate every conversation. You only need to speak with such precision that people remember what you said long after you've left. This is what the shift looks like in real life. Not louder, not meaner, not more aggressive, but deeper, still, unapologetically intentional. You don't earn respect through performance. You radiate it through presence. You embody it through consistency. Because in the end, the world doesn't follow the loudest voice. It follows the person who moves with unwavering clarity and doesn't ask for permission to exist. Strength doesn't always walk in with noise. Sometimes it enters the room quietly and changes everything without saying a word. You've seen this person before. Maybe you've met them. Or maybe deep down you've always wanted to become them. They don't raise their voice. They don't compete for attention. They don't seek validation. And yet, the room pays attention when they move. People measure their words more carefully when speaking to them. Their presence carries something you can't quite explain, only feel. That's not magic. That's not charisma. It's inner alignment. This is the new face of strength. Calm without being passive. Kind without being available to everyone. Present without being easily reached. This person is not trying to be liked. They're not chasing connection. They've already built one with themselves. They know who they are. They know what they tolerate. And most importantly, they know what they will never allow again. That energy, it's rare because it's expensiver. It's built through pain, through boundaries, through loss, through solitude, through deep self-confrontation. You don't just become this person. You unbecome everything that made you easy to manipulate. And here's what you'll notice. 1. People stop playing games with you. Not because they respect your feelings, but because they respect your structure. They feel the boundary before you speak it. They sense the "don't try me" without needing you to say it. You no longer have to defend your worth with long explanations. Your presence does it for you. 2. Your absence becomes powerful. Before, when you left, no one noticed because your presence was too light, too agreeable, too safe. But now, when you pull away, the silence echoes, not because you were loud, but because now you're felt. This is the power of someone who no longer negotiates, their self-respect. 3. You attract differently. You stop being a magnet for chaos, for emotional vampires, for people who only want to consume, because those people can no longer find a crack in your structure. You begin attracting those who don't need to be convinced to treat you well, because they feel instinctively what kind of energy you embody. You don't teach people how to love you with long speeches. You teach them through the way you love yourself, in silence. 4. You disappoint more people, and that's a good thing. The new you will be too much for some. Too clear, too unavailable, too immune to manipulation. They'll say you've changed. They'll say you've become distant. They'll say, you're hard to reach. And they're right. You've outgrown the version of yourself who needed to be constantly accessible just to feel seen. You don't exist to be everyone's comfort zone. You exist to live in alignment with who you really are. And that alignment, it's magnetic, it's masculine, it's feminine, it's undeniable. It is strength that doesn't shout. It's strength that simply is. Machiavelli understood this long before psychology gave it a name. He knew that those who are respected and feared are not the cruel, not the cold, but the ones with structure, with discipline, with an untouchable center. That's who you're becoming. You are no longer the person who explains every decision, who makes room for everyone, who waits to be chosen. You are the person who chooses, who walks away calmly, who protects their peace like a king guards his throne. You are no longer available for emotional charity. And in the final part of this journey, we'll seal that transformation, not with more advice, but with a declaration, because the world will keep testing you, but after today you will never answer that test as the same person again. You're not here to be liked. You're not here to be understood. You're not here to be chosen by those who never truly saw you. You're here to be sovereign. There is a kind of silence that isn't emptiness. It's ownership. There is a kind of stillness that doesn't mean apathy. It means you've stopped handing out access like apologies. You no longer explain your standards. You live them. You no longer negotiate your intuition. You trust it. You no longer plead for decency. You expect it quietly. And when it doesn't come, you leave. Not with drama, not with fire, but with something far more terrifying. To those who relied on your predictability, you leave with absence. The gap where your emotional labor used to be. The silence where your constant explanations used to live. The stillness that used to ache for closure, now sealed by clarity. Let them talk. Let them name you cold. Let them say you've changed. Let them call it ego. That's not your concern. Because the truth is simple. You were never seen because you never stood firm enough to be felt. Until now, this is not the end. This is your reintroduction to the world. A world that will test you, where old patterns will try to pull you back, where silence will feel like abandonment before it becomes power. But every time you choose presence over approval, every time you say no without explaining, every time you protect your peace instead of performing, you sharpen your edge. And over time, that edge becomes a boundary. That boundary becomes a standard. And that standard becomes your new reality. You don't demand respect anymore. You are respect. This is your sovereign declaration. I no longer exist to be accessible. I exist to be in alignment. And from this moment on, my presence will be expensive, and my absence will be noticed. If this resonates with you, drop a comment below. From today forward, I choose respect. Let the world adjust. You don't have to. They don't disrespect you because you're weak. They disrespect you because you're predictable. Too easy to read. Too easy to reach. Too easy to forget. You hold the door. You apologize first. You text back fast. You explain. Clarify. Soften. Bend. And somewhere along the way, they stopped listening. You thought kindness would earn respect. That being honest, generous, available would mean something. But in a world built on leverage, predictability is not virtue. It's vulnerability. Machiavelli warned us, if you must choose between being loved or being feared, choose fear. But he wasn't advocating cruelty. He was exposing a law of power. Familiarity breeds contempt. The more you explain, the less you're understood. The more you give, the less you're valued. The more you try to be liked, the easier you are to leave. Let me ask you something. Have you ever sat in a room and felt like you didn't exist? Have you ever watched people walk past your efforts, your loyalty, your presence, like they were stepping over a puddle? That's not because you lacked value. It's because you made your value too accessible. And in the economy of human attention, what's too accessible becomes disposable. This isn't about becoming cruel. It's about becoming calculated. Because silence, when used right, is not absence. It's authority. Stillness, when intentional, doesn't mean apathy. It means you've stopped bleeding for those who never learned how to bandage you. And the moment you stop explaining yourself, people start listening. The moment you stop trying to be chosen, they start trying to keep you. And the moment you become unreadable, you become unforgettable. This is what Machiavelli understood. That power doesn't live in words. It lives in presence, in mystery, in the discipline to hold back, while the world demands you unravel. Because when your presence becomes a question, it begins to carry the weight of an answer no one's ready to hear. And that weight is the beginning of everything they never expected from you. That's where it starts. Let's go deeper into the pain you've been hiding in plain sight. There's a kind of pain no one talks about. It doesn't scream. It doesn't scar. It doesn't even leave a mark. But it stays. And it drains you one quiet moment at a time. It's the pain of being overlooked, of giving your best and being remembered last, of showing up for people who never showed up for you. You felt it. In that meeting when your ideas were passed over, at the dinner table when your silence wasn't noticed, in the relationship when your patience was mistaken for permission. And what makes it worse is that no one sees it happening. Because you were calm, because you were kind, because you never made a scene. So your pain became invisible, and your presence predictable. You were taught that kindness is a virtue, that forgiveness is strength, that loyalty is the glue that holds everything together. But no one taught you this kindness, without boundaries, becomes bait. Forgiveness without distance becomes permission. Loyalty without strategy becomes self-destruction. This isn't just philosophy. It's history. Socrates, the man who taught the world how to think, was sentenced to death by those he tried to enlighten. Jesus, the symbol of unconditional love, was crucified by the very people he forgave. Joan of Arc, fearless and faithful, was burned alive by the kingdom she tried to protect. Even now, it hasn't changed. The employee who never says no is the one overworked and underpaid. The friend who always listens is the one no one asks about. The partner who always forgives is the one most taken for granted. The man who's always understanding is the one most abandoned. The woman who never complains is the one most ignored. Why? Because we don't protect what's always available. We don't cherish what's always there. We don't fear losing what never dares to walk away. The tragedy isn't that good people get hurt. It's that they're hurt silently, repeatedly, without warning, and then blamed for allowing it. You tell yourself, I should be stronger. I should be clearer. I should have said something. But you weren't weak. You were just taught the wrong rules. You thought consistency meant value. That love meant endurance. That silence meant maturity. But here's the brutal truth. What you tolerate teaches people how to treat you. And what they see too often, they start to forget. Respect doesn't die in one big moment. It dies in 1,000 small ones you thought didn't matter. The delayed text, the backhanded compliment, the missed apology, the way they stop asking how you feel because they already assume you'll be fine. And you play your part. You smile. You swallow it. You say, it's okay, even when it's not, because you thought that being nice would protect you. That being low maintenance made you lovable. That being silent made you strong. But the world doesn't respect the agreeable. It respects the unavailable, not because mystery is sexy, but because mystery is safe from abuse. People fear distance. They question what they don't fully understand. They guard their words when they're not sure where they stand with you. But you made it too easy. You stayed. You gave. You explained. You forgave. And now they don't fear losing you, because they've never had to. This is the hidden pain of the kind-hearted. You don't get hated. You get overlooked. You don't get fought. You get forgotten. And that hurts. In a way, betrayal never could. Because betrayal ends with a cut. But neglect, it erodes you slowly, until one day, you look in the mirror and wonder where you went. So ask yourself, was it really that they couldn't see you? Or had you made yourself too visible to be noticed? Because sometimes, the ones who vanish first are the ones who were never truly seen to begin with. You thought it was personal, but it never was. It wasn't about your heart. It was about your pattern. Because if you want to know why good people get ignored, you have to stop blaming your kindness and start understanding your wiring. Because the truth is brutal. The brain is not built for fairness. It's built for efficiency, for survival, and in its cold logic, anything predictable is non-threatening. And anything non-threatening is easily dismissed. Your kindness, classified as safe. Your patience filed under non-urgent. Your loyalty, tagged as always there. You become psychological wallpaper, always present, never noticed. But here's where it gets deeper. Humans don't just respond to love. We respond to tension, to uncertainty, to the unknown. That's why the boss who barely speaks commands the room. That's why the partner who holds something back feels more magnetic. That's why the friend who's hard to read is often the most respected. It's not manipulation. It's human design. We chase what we don't fully understand. We value what we fear losing. We protect what we feel we could never replace. So when you give everything up front, your thoughts, your time, your energy, people stop leaning in because you've already laid yourself bare. You think vulnerability builds connection, and it can. But vulnerability without discernment becomes exposure. It's like handing someone the blueprint to your emotional core. They didn't earn it, so they don't protect it. Machiavelli knew this. He didn't preach silence out of fear. He preached silence out of strategy. He understood. The one who speaks less holds more power. The one who reveals little controls the frame. And the one who doesn't respond right away forces others to think twice. Let's go even deeper. This isn't just philosophy. It's biology. The brain's selective attention system is built to filter out what's familiar, what's constant, what doesn't change. The loudest sound in the room. You notice it. But the hum of the AC, you stopped hearing it 10 minutes ago. That's how people start treating your presence as background noise. And the terrifying part, you trained them to. By always responding fast. By always forgiving. By always being the understanding one. They don't guard their words with you. Because they've never had to fear the consequence of your silence. They don't value your time. Because you've always given it freely. They don't miss you. Because you've never left. Now ask yourself, who gets respected in your life? Is it the one who overshares, or the one who speaks in careful doses? Is it the one who's always online, always available, always explaining, or the one who moves in silence, but whose absence feels loud, even in nature? This law holds. The lion isn't feared because it roars all day. It's feared because you don't know when it will move. The snake doesn't announce its presence. It waits. It calculates. It strikes once. Power isn't loud. Power is unreadable. So, let me ask you again. When was the last time you let someone miss you? When was the last time your silence made someone nervous? When was the last time your absence taught someone your value? Because that is the true currency of power. It's not how much you give. It's how carefully you choose, when and to whom you give it. Respect isn't given to the most open heart. It's given to the most self-controlled mind. And the tragedy. The kindest people, the ones who should be most cherished, are often the least feared. Not because they aren't strong, but because they never made anyone earn access to that strength. So here's the shift. You don't become respected by being louder. You become respected by being less available. By making your energy something people work to deserve. By creating psychological tension in your presence. That doesn't mean becoming distant out of bitterness. It means becoming calculated out of wisdom. Machiavelli said, "It is much safer to be feared than loved, if one cannot be both." But the fear he spoke of wasn't fear of cruelty. It was fear of mystery. Fear of losing your favor. Fear of being on the outside. Of your silence. Because when people can't predict you, they tread carefully. And when they can't access you at will, they begin to respect the weight of your presence. And that is when everything begins to shift. When your silence starts speaking louder than your kindness ever did. You didn't just get hurt. You were trained to stay quiet, trained to be reasonable, trained to make peace even when the war was inside you. But here's the truth no one told you. Pain doesn't always come from cruelty. It comes from repetition, from the same emotional mistake, played on loop. In the name of being good. Let's break it down. 1. You explain what should never need explaining. Someone disrespects you, and your first instinct is to clarify, to soften, to justify your own boundary. I didn't mean it like that. I was just trying to help. I only said it because I care. But every time you explain what should be self-evident, you shrink your presence. Powerful people don't justify. They state. Then, they hold silence, like a blade. When your boundaries need paragraphs, they stop being boundaries. They become negotiations. And your authority dies in the fine print. 2. You forgive without requiring transformation. Yes, forgiveness is strength, but forgiveness without consequence is permission. A signal that says, there's no cost for hurting me. So they come back. Some mistake, new excuse. And you let them in. Not because you're weak, but because you confuse healing with being accommodating. But healing isn't keeping people close. It's teaching them absence, silence, space, distance. That's how you change behavior. Because if there's no pain in the loss, then what exactly did you forgive? 3. You confuse honesty with overexposure. You were told, be open, be real. So you shared everything, your fears, your wounds, your past. But here's the truth. Honesty without discretion is emotional nudity. They didn't earn your story, so they didn't protect it. And now, what was sacred to you is just gossip to them. Real connection doesn't come from oversharing. It comes from restraint, from knowing when not to speak until someone proves they can hold what you carry. 4. You ignore small violations. It starts with a joke at your expense, a message left unread, a compliment that cuts just a little too deep. You feel it, but you let it slide. Maybe they didn't mean it. It's not that serious. I don't want to overreact. But here's the Machiavellian truth. The big betrayals are built on foundations of the small ones you excused. Every time you stayed silent, you trained them to expect you always would. Respect isn't built in grand gestures. It's built in micro decisions, where you draw the line. When you don't smile, how you respond to the first red flag. You either confront the small or get consumed by the big. 5. You mistake being needed for being respected. You think if people depend on you, they'll value you. So you over-deliver. You fix everything. You show up before they even ask. And for a while it works. But over time, you're no longer seen as powerful. You're seen as useful, like a charger, like a search bar, like background Wi-Fi. Essential, but never sacred. And the moment they no longer need what you offer, they disappear because they never respected you. They used you. That's the cycle. You overgive, they expect. You burn out, they replace you. And the most dangerous part, you blame yourself. Maybe if I gave more, they'd love me right. Maybe if I just tried harder. But giving more to the wrong person doesn't earn love. It erodes self-worth. So let me be clear. These mistakes don't mean you're weak. They mean you were never taught how power works. You were trained to be agreeable, to be likable, to avoid making anyone uncomfortable. But here's the Machiavellian shift. Being likable is not power. Being respected is, and you don't earn that through exposure. You earn it through discretion, through boundaries, through silence. The power to say, you don't get that part of me. You don't get another chance. You don't get my words, only my distance. This isn't cruelty. It's clarity. Because until you change your strategy, your kindness will keep getting weaponized against you. Your empathy will keep being mistaken for obedience. And your love will keep ending in exhaustion. So ask yourself, are you ready to stop being needed and start being respected? Because the moment you draw that line is the moment the world rewrites how it sees you. At some point, you stop asking, why do they treat me like this? And you start asking, what did I allow them to believe about who I am? That is the turning point. It's not emotional. It's strategic. It's the moment pain gives way to clarity. When the story shifts from victimhood to sovereignty. Because here's the part most people will never admit. The world doesn't treat you based on your heart. It treats you based on your frame, your posture, your stillness, your silence, the boundaries you enforce without ever raising your voice. This is where we step into philosophy, into the mechanics of presence. And no one understood this better than Niccolò Machiavelli. Most people misunderstood him. They think he glorified corruption. They say he admired manipulators. They reduce him to a tyrant's handbook. But if you read deeper, you find something else. Machiavelli wasn't promoting cruelty. He was diagnosing reality. He wasn't creating the rules. He was revealing them. It is much safer to be feared than loved. If one cannot be both. That sentence has haunted society for 500 years. Not because it's evil, but because it's accurate. Because love, without boundaries, fades. But fear, when rooted in respect, anchors. You don't have to be a tyrant, but you do have to carry the capacity for silence, for distance, for withdrawal. Let me explain. In every human interaction, there's a silent question being asked. What happens if I cross you? And if the answer is nothing, they'll forgive me. Then they will. Respect doesn't come from your willingness to endure. It comes from your ability to walk away, to hold still, to withhold, to protect yourself without asking permission. And that's where we bring in Carl Jung. Jung spoke of integrating the shadow, the dark side of the psyche we hide, deny, suppress. But he didn't say to avoid the shadow. He said to own it. Because only the person who knows how to harm and chooses not to is truly moral. Otherwise, you're not good. You're harmless. And harmless people don't command respect. They attract control. You must become dangerous. Not in behavior, in potential. So that when you say nothing, people hear thunder. So that when you leave a room, the silence follows. Now enter Nietzsche, the philosopher of fire. He didn't admire obedience. He admired self-overcoming. Not by being agreeable, but by becoming untouchable. He wrote, "He who cannot put his thoughts on ice should not enter the heat of dispute." In other words, if you can't control your inner fire, you're not powerful. You're combustible. Let's thread them together. Machiavelli taught you to be respected through restraint. Jung taught you to own the parts of you that can destroy and discipline them. Nietzsche taught you to become sovereign, not through peace, but through self-mastery. And now, you begin to see the truth. Power doesn't come from being feared. It comes from being unreadable, unshakable, undeniable. Think of the people you remember, the ones who walk into a room without saying a word, and suddenly, everything around them adjusts. They don't command respect with noise. They command it with gravity. They speak last. They move slow. They never overshare. And yet, you think about them more than anyone else. That is presence. And presence is strategy. Let's make it real. Think of a lion. It doesn't roar all day. It doesn't chase every squirrel in the jungle. It doesn't need to. It moves slowly, silently, deliberately, and everything in its path feels the tension of restraint. Not because the lion is cruel, but because everyone knows it could be. That's your new standard. You don't explain. You don't plead. You don't try to convince the world of your goodness. You move like someone who can destroy but doesn't need to. Because people don't respect those who give everything. They respect those who make them earn access. So from now on, every boundary you hold is not a wall. It's a signal that says, I know who I am. I know what I allow. And I know what I'll walk away from, without a word. And when your silence becomes a frame, not a reaction, the world will finally meet you with the weight you once begged for. You've heard the logic. You've felt the pain. You've understood the philosophy. But none of that matters until something inside you snaps. Not violently, not emotionally, but irrevocably. It's the moment you stop seeing yourself as the nice one and start seeing yourself as a sovereign force. Not because you're angry, but because you're done. Done apologizing before anyone's offended. Done explaining things that should be self-evident. Done softening your tone to make other people feel comfortable while you slowly disappear from your own life. This is not a behavioral tweak. It's an identity fracture. A psychological death, followed by a strategic resurrection. Let me show you what it sounds like. You stop asking, "Do they like me?" and start asking, "Do I like who I become around them?" You stop saying, "I hope they understand me," and start declaring, "I no longer owe them my clarity." You stop giving endless second chances, not because you're cold, but because your time is sacred. And sacred things are not handed out. They're earned. This shift doesn't make you bitter. It makes you precise. You begin to see the cost of being constantly available. You begin to feel the weight of every yes you said when you wanted to say no. You begin to remember what it felt like to have peace before your phone became a leash. And something deep inside of you whispers, "No more." No more giving your energy away like it's infinite. No more lowering your standards just to be tolerated. No more explaining your worth to people committed to misunderstanding you. You don't become cruel. You become unapologetically clear, because here's what they never taught you. The version of you that needed to be liked by everyone is the same version that kept getting betrayed by everyone. That version needs to die. Not gently, not slowly, but completely. And in its place, a new version rises. One who doesn't beg to be invited in. One who doesn't fear being misunderstood. One who knows that peace isn't found in approval but in absence. Absence of drama. Absence of noise. Absence of people who think your silence means permission. This is the psychological pivot. You stop negotiating your value. You start naming your terms. You stop proving yourself. You start letting distance do the talking. Because in a world addicted to noise, silence becomes power. And when people feel that your attention is no longer guaranteed, they begin to treat it as sacred. This isn't arrogance. This is spiritual self-respect. And the moment it clicks, your life changes. You don't chase anymore. You let go, not out of hate, out of truth. You don't seek closure, because silence is closure. And walking away without looking back is a statement far louder than any speech. You don't need validation. You are validation. You are proof that rising doesn't require noise, that disappearing doesn't mean defeat, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not respond. Machiavelli called it distance. Jung called it integration. Nietzsche called it self-overcoming. But you call it coming home. Not to who the world told you to be, but to who you were. Before you shrank yourself for survival. And now, you stand taller. You walk slower. You speak less. But when you do, every word lands like a verdict. Not because you're trying to be feared, but because your peace has become expensive. That's the shift. You don't become harder. You become heavier. You don't become louder. You become undeniable. And once you become undeniable, you never have to explain again. You simply exist, and everything around you adjusts. So you've changed on the inside. You feel it, the weight, the stillness, the calm that no longer begs to be liked. But now comes the real test. How do you carry that power into the world without saying a word? Because true power doesn't live in speeches. It lives in presence. It speaks through posture. It vibrates through silence. Let's break it down. 1. In conversation. Speak less. Pause more. Own your words. The average person speaks to be heard. You speak to anchor the room. Don't rush to answer. Let silence stretch. Let the weight of the pause do the talking. Make them earn your response. Drop, I think. Maybe. Just my opinion. Replace them with, this is what I see. Here's where I stand. That's the line. Speak like the room is already listening, because it is even when they pretend it's not. And when you pause before you speak, you introduce gravity, and gravity commands attention. 2. In relationships. Stop giving what they haven't earned. Don't confuse kindness with currency. Love is not supply and demand, and your presence should never be free to access. You want to build respect, match effort, mirror energy, and when it's not mutual, subtract yourself. No speech, no guilt trip, just absence. Because the most dangerous kind of presence is the one that disappears without warning. They won't forget you not because of what you gave, but because of what they lost. 3. In conflict. Don't react. Respond only if it serves your power. They want you emotional. They want you to explain. Explode. Justify. Why? Because rage is readable. And when you're readable, you're controllable. Instead, pause. Hold eye contact. Let silence do the burning. And if you speak, make it surgical. 1 sentence, maybe 2, delivered like a scalpel, not a scream. Let them feel your composure like a wall, one they can't move. Because when you don't flinch, you become the mirror that exposes their chaos. 4. In leadership. Speak last, move first. Decide without apology. Whether it's business or boundaries, you don't ask for consensus. You set tone. Let others talk. Let them reveal. Then you enter with precision. Clear. Calm. Final. You don't explain every decision. You don't decorate truth to be digestible. You don't ask permission to assert your clarity. That's leadership. Not in titles, but in tension. People follow silence they can't read, faster than noise they understand. 5. In daily life. Be harder to reach. Share less. Guard your peace. Not everyone deserves excess. Not everyone deserves updates. Not everyone deserves explanations. Make your time expensive. Make your attention rare. Make your silence louder than your words. Practical power means delaying replies, not announcing your next move. Letting "no" to be a complete sentence. Because when people stop being sure about where they stand with you, they stand straighter. That's influence. Machiavelli would have called it controlled perception. Nietzsche would have called it self-overcoming. Jung would have called it the integration of restraint. But you don't have to call it anything. You live it. Because power isn't posturing. It's discipline. It's stillness. It's the ability to say nothing and still shift the room. So let them wonder. Let them notice your distance. Let them ask what changed. You don't owe them an answer. You never did. Because true power doesn't explain, doesn't chase, doesn't beg. It walks in silence and forces the world to respond. And if this made something inside you go quiet, don't ignore it. That silence you feel right now, that's you remembering who you are. So, here you are. No longer the one who explains everything. No longer the one who bends to be chosen. No longer the one who gives so much that you forget what it feels like to keep something for yourself. You've changed, not with fire, not with rage, but with stillness, like steel, forged in silence, like mountains, formed beneath pressure. And now, the world sees it. But they can't explain it. They can't name it. Because it's not something you say. It's something you've become. You walk slower. You move with intention. You speak less, but when you do, your voice lands like gravity. You don't enter rooms to be noticed. You enter them knowing you're not there to impress. You are the presence. You don't chase answers. You let silence echo. You don't explain your decisions. You let your boundaries speak for you. And those who used to test your patience now hesitate before speaking your name because something happened. You stopped trying to be everything for everyone. You stopped performing humility as a survival strategy. You stopped shrinking so others could feel tall. You realized something most never do. Peace is expensive, and not everyone can afford your presence. You're no longer addicted to being liked. You've discovered something more potent. Being remembered, being missed, being respected, even in your absence. And here's the paradox: you didn't raise your voice. You lowered your availability. You didn't become louder. You became less accessible. You didn't demand respect. You became someone who made disrespect to feel like a risk. You are no longer easy to figure out, no longer easy to reach, no longer easy to shake. And they feel it in how you look at them without rushing to comfort, in how you pause instead of reacting, in how you walk away before they know what they've lost. You've become the kind of person who isn't feared because of violence, isn't loved because of obedience, but is respected because no one quite knows what you'll do next. That's power, not because you dominate, but because you don't need to. You hold back, you withdraw, you vanish, and your silence teaches louder than your presence ever could. You are not cold. You are calculated. You are not cruel. You are clear. And that clarity, it makes you unmistakable. The old you needed to be chosen, needed to be praised, needed to be seen. The new you chooses, commands, and creates silence that speaks. This is the new face of strength, not noise, not perfection, not the desperate need to be loved, but ownership of time, of space, of energy, of self. And now, when people see you again, they don't say, "What happened to you?" They say, "I can't read you anymore." And that's exactly the point. Because unreadable means untouchable. And untouchable means you've finally returned to yourself. You're not here to be liked. You're not here to be explained. You're not here to be chosen by people who never had the eyes to see you. You're here to be sovereign, to walk like someone whose presence is not a request but a recalibration of the room. You are not soft. You are silent. You are not weak. You are strategic. And that silence, it's not emptiness. It's ownership. That stillness, it's not apathy. It's precision. Because the version of you who used to beg for clarity has now become the clarity. The one who used to explain now speaks through absence. The one who used to chase now disappears without noise and leaves an echo. They will talk. They will guess. They will wonder what changed. Let them. Because you've stopped proving yourself. You've stopped negotiating your worth. You've stopped being available to the chaos of the unqualified. Now, if they don't value your words, you give them your silence. If they don't respect your time, you give them your distance. If they don't honor your presence, you remind them by taking it away. You are no longer emotional collateral. You are not a backup plan. You are not the understanding one they run to after burning bridges behind them. You are no longer here to be convenient. You are here to be complete. And from this moment on, you do not lower your standards to be kept. You raise your boundaries to be remembered. This is the Machiavellian truth. Not about manipulation, not about cruelty, but about self-rule. The ability to walk alone and be followed, without ever asking to be. The strength to disappear and become louder in your absence than you ever were in your presence. Because true power, it isn't noisy, it isn't charming, it isn't perfect. It's quiet, it's disciplined, it's unavailable. So let them wonder. Let them search for the old you. He's gone. She's gone. That version died quietly, in a room where no one was listening. And the one who walks out of that silence now doesn't explain, doesn't plead, doesn't kneel. They move, and the world adjusts. Because now, you are not feared for the damage you cause. You are feared because no one can predict your silence. And that is what makes kings walk alone and still be followed. You don't need to be beautiful. You don't need to be rich. You don't even need to be seen. You just need to know how to make someone think about you, relentlessly. Have you ever missed someone so much it hurt to breathe? You stared at your screen, waiting, watched them come online, and say nothing. And still some part of you hoped they'd care, hoped you'd matter. You asked yourself, what did I do wrong? But here's the truth, you didn't do anything wrong. You were just predictable. They weren't giving you love. They were giving you absence on purpose. Not certainty, but hope. And hope is the cruelest drug. It doesn't feed you. It starves you just enough to keep you crawling back. And Machiavelli, he saw this coming 500 years ago. He didn't teach people how to love. He taught them how to haunt, how to linger in the mind of another, without saying a word, through silence, through contradiction, through calculated unpredictability. What truly obsesses people is not connection, it's interruption. The cliffhanger, the unfinished story. Not the one who said I love you, but the one who left, right before the ending. This is not a love video. This is a blueprint for psychological presence, for emotional architecture, for becoming the one thing they can't stop thinking about. Because obsession isn't about attraction, it's about confusion. And the greatest confusion is almost understanding someone, but never fully solving them. So if you've ever been overlooked, ghosted, or taken for granted, it's time to flip the script. You don't need to beg for love. You don't need to explain your worth. You just need to become unshakable in their mind. There's a kind of pain that leaves no bruise, no scar, no scene. No one praises you for enduring it. No one even knows it's there. It's the pain of being remembered only when convenient, of once mattering and then fading. You were the one who always reached out, always made the first move. You sent the message. You waited. Hours passed. They came online. They scrolled. They laughed. But they didn't respond. Still, you held the door. Still, you remembered their birthday. Still, you listened to their silence and held space for a soul that never made room for yours. And now, when they speak of connection, it's not you they mention. Then comes the whisper, the one inside your own mind. Was I too predictable? Too easy to reach? Too much? Too soon? That ache isn't sadness. It's starvation. The hunger to be missed. To be recalled in someone's quiet moment, and not just when they're lonely at 2 a.m. But instead, you gave. You gave your attention, your empathy, your emotional currency. And in return, you got silence. Not just any silence, but the kind that makes you rewrite your self-worth. Not because you're weak, but because you were too legible, too understandable. And in a world addicted to mystery, understanding is a death sentence for desire. Here's what no one tells you. In the economy of emotional attention, what's abundant becomes invisible. You thought generosity would earn affection, but you showed all your pages before they even opened the book. You let them read the ending before they fell in love with the story. And that's why they forgot you. Not because you lacked value, but because you gave away the tension. And tension is the thread that keeps people reading. Let's tell the truth. People don't obsess over what they fully understand. They obsess over what they almost grasp, but can't quite decode. You weren't boring. You were complete. And in a world ruled by endless scrolling and instant dopamine, completion is not compelling. It's forgettable. You became clear too soon. And clarity is where desire dies. They moved on, not because you weren't enough, but because there was nothing left to wonder. No riddle, no edge, no silence thick enough to echo. That ends here, because obsession isn't built on visibility. It's built on absence that lingers, on emotional puzzles that refuse to be solved. In the next part, we'll dissect the mechanism, the hidden psychological and social patterns that train people to forget the givers and chase the unpredictable, and how Machiavelli saw this centuries ago, not as romance, but as power. Because this was never about being liked. It was about becoming unforgettable. To understand why they forget you, why they lose interest. The moment you become emotionally available, you have to challenge everything you were taught about love. Because the truth is brutal, the brain isn't addicted to love. It's addicted to uncertainty. We don't crave connection. We crave the possibility of connection. The maybe. The unresolved. The spark we almost catch but can't quite hold. Think about the person you couldn't stop thinking about. Was it because they loved you deeply? Or because they vanished, right when you thought they wouldn't? It's that flicker of doubt. That one message left unread. That perfect silence after a vulnerable moment. That's where obsession begins. Psychologists call this intermittent reinforcement. It's the reason gamblers stay glued to machines, not because they win, but because they might. Every spin is a maybe, a whisper. This could be it. And that maybe floods the brain with dopamine, not from joy, but from anticipation. Now bring that into human connection. When someone gives you warmth, then pulls away, shares vulnerability, then disappears, your brain spirals. Not from love, but from emotional dissonance. Certainty ends the loop. Uncertainty traps you inside it. And here's where Machiavelli comes in. No, he didn't write about dating, but he understood power, and power lives in what people can't quite predict. What is always available loses its value. He didn't whisper that. He carved it into political survival. People don't chase abundance. They chase scarcity. Not because it's better, but because being denied bruises the ego, and bruised egos, they obsess. You were told, be honest, be emotionally open, be consistent, and you followed it. But in practice, that creates comfort. And comfort never creates obsession. Comfort is warm, It's familiar. It's safe. But it never lingers. It never haunts. You weren't forgotten because you lacked beauty. You were forgotten because you lacked friction. You offered too much clarity, when what they craved was the question. Because the mind doesn't obsess over what it understands. It obsesses over what it almost understands, what slips through its fingers. And the people we can't let go of, they're not the kindest. They're the ones we never solved. Machiavelli knew this. He never gave people what they wanted. He gave them what they feared to want, then took it away. He offered silence when they expected words, distance when they expected closeness, contradiction when they were dying for clarity. Make your presence rare. He'd say, so that your absence becomes unbearable. Because when you withdraw at the height of connection, you don't lose them. You carve yourself into them. They replay your last message, not because it was kind, but because it was incomplete. That's not cruelty. That's design. Because obsession isn't built on affection. It's built on architecture. You control the highs. You orchestrate the lows. You don't flood them with love. You drip feed longing. And that longing, it doesn't fade. It echoes. If you've ever chased someone who gave you just enough to keep you confused, but never enough to feel safe, then you've already lived this. Like this video, if you recognize that pattern, share it with someone who's always giving, always available, and always overlooked. And if this message is waking something in you, support this channel through super thanks. Because we're not just making content. We're building frameworks for those ready to stop bleeding and start commanding. Subscribe, not for comfort, but for clarity. Clarity. You weaponize one psychological shift at a time. You thought you did everything right. You replied quickly. You were thoughtful. You reassured. You showed them you cared. But none of it worked. Why? Because obsession doesn't grow in safety. It doesn't bloom in certainty. It feeds on tension. It drinks mystery. And it dies. The moment you become emotionally predictable. Let's dissect the 5 common mistakes. The ones that quietly erase your presence from their mind before you ever had the chance to leave a mark. Mistake number 1. Emotional over-availability. You gave too much. Too soon. Your story. Your attention. Your secrets. Poured out like an open book. But when the human brain reads a book too fast, it forgets the ending. You became too easy to read. Too emotionally loud. What the mind can easily map, it quickly ignores. What to do instead? Let them work for layers. Withhold. Reveal slowly like a novel with missing pages. Mistake number 2. Chasing clarity. You wanted them to feel safe. So you explained everything. Your intentions. Your emotions. Your silences. But Machiavelli knew clarity is the enemy of influence. When people know exactly where they stand with you, they stop thinking. And when they stop thinking, they stop caring. What to do instead? Let uncertainty breathe. Leave room for interpretation. Let your pauses speak louder than your answers. Mistake number 3. Full access. You were always there. A message away. Quick to reply. Eager to please. Always present. But here's the paradox. When you're too present, you become invisible. Obsession isn't built on availability. It's built on earned proximity. What to do instead? Limit your access. Let your attention feel like a privilege, not a default setting. Mistake number 4. Over-explaining yourself. You felt the need to justify everything. The delay, the distance, the tone change. if they understand me. You thought, they won't leave. But understanding is not protection. It's closure. And closure kills tension. Machiavelli understood. Explanation erases mystery. And mystery is where power breathes. What to do instead? Let ambiguity stand. Let them wonder. Let your silence become the mirror they can't stop staring into. Mistake number 5, giving emotional security too early. You showed your hand before the game even began. You made them feel safe before they even earned it. You promised commitment before they proved their value. But obsession doesn't come from guarantees. It comes from risk. From almost losing something you never fully had. What to do instead? Don't declare loyalty, imply it. Don't promise presence, suggest it. Let them feel chosen, but unsure if the moment will last. Brutal truth. People don't stop obsessing because you were unkind. They stop obsessing because you were too emotionally generous. Too smooth. Too clear. Too easy to predict. Obsession doesn't chase softness. It chases tension. It chases the unfinished thought. You want to know what keeps people up at night? Not love. Not affection. But this, I almost had them. But I didn't. And I don't know why. That loop, that ache, that missing piece is the fingerprint of obsession. You don't create that by giving. You create it by withholding. By becoming a story that refuses to end. There's a reason most people never hold power. Not because they're unworthy, but because they believe the lie that goodness is enough to be remembered. That being generous, consistent, emotionally available will somehow guarantee permanence. It doesn't. Niccolò Machiavelli saw this for what it was, a beautiful fantasy. And like all fantasies, it collapses the moment it meets reality. Because reality doesn't reward kindness. It rewards positioning. In The Prince, he wrote, "It is much safer to be feared than loved." If one must choose, but this wasn't a call to cruelty. It was a call to clarity. He was exposing a brutal law of power. Fear, uncertainty, and strategic distance create deeper loyalty than comfort ever will. Not because people love it, but because they can't forget it. Let's make something clear. Obsession is not born from affection. It's not the byproduct of how much you give. It's the result of what you withhold. Love makes people feel safe. But obsession makes them feel off balance. Like they've touched something rare, something dangerous, something they're terrified of losing. And that edge, that tension, that quiet imbalance, is the birthplace of power. Think back to every person you've ever obsessed over. Were they the most loving, the most available, the most emotionally generous? No, they were the ones who left something out. Who made you question yourself? Who gave you almost enough and then stepped back? They didn't give you closure. They gave you implication. A glance that meant too much. A silence that felt intentional. A message that never came. And the worst part, it wasn't an accident. It was design. A design Machiavelli would have admired. Because power isn't about control. It's about perception. Not who you are, but how they see you. And when shaped correctly, perception becomes stronger than reality. You think silence means disconnection. But silence, when intentional, becomes a weapon. You think distance pushes people away. But distance, when well-timed, makes presence unforgettable. Machiavelli said it simply, the vulgar crowd is always taken by appearances. Because appearance, once curated, is control. Modern culture teaches you the opposite. Be transparent. Be open. Be authentic. Let people in. But here's what Machiavelli would tell you transparency is for peasants. Authenticity, if unfiltered, becomes access. And what's always accessible is never feared, never respected, never remembered. You must become a contradiction, warm, but restrained, present, then gone, affectionate, but unreadable. You must never explain the full story. Let them work for understanding. Let them earn interpretation. Because the mind doesn't cherish what it receives easily. It cherishes what it builds itself through imagination, through gaps, through silence. And Machiavelli understood this. To be fully known is to be easily discarded. But to be imagined, that's eternal. You don't become powerful by being loud. You become powerful by becoming unsolvable. So ask yourself, are you giving too much clarity, too much reassurance, too much presence? Or are you crafting your image the way Machiavelli would, with silence, with scarcity, with strategy? Because obsession is not a reaction to being loved. It's the residue of never being understood. And unforgettable people, they don't explain themselves. They haunt, they echo, they vanish when the connection feels most alive. And in doing so, they become a question that no one ever truly answers. You were taught to seek love, to be kind, to be open, to be vulnerable, to prove you were worthy of being chosen. But no one told you the truth, that the people who get chased are rarely the ones who love the most. They're the ones who know how to disappear without leaving a sound. The ones who understand that love freely offered often goes ignored, but love hinted at then withdrawn becomes unforgettable. So, now, you shift from someone who needs to be loved to someone who commands space without ever having to ask. But here's the secret. This shift doesn't start with tactics. It starts with identity. Because the world doesn't treat you as you are. It treats you as you believe you are, and how that belief walks into the room. So ask yourself, do you act from need or from choice? Are your words trying to be heard, or are you letting your silence speak? Are you trying to be understood, or are you becoming the one people work to understand? That's the difference between the forgotten and the unforgettable. Machiavelli never operated from emotion. He operated from positioning. He didn't need to be loud. He needed to be calculated. He knew that when a ruler appears too available, he forfeits his authority. But when he moves with elegance, with timing, with restraint, his silence becomes command. You can do the same. But it begins internally, not with manipulation, with mastery. Mastery of your time, mastery of your energy, mastery of your attention. You stop explaining, you stop chasing, you stop pouring yourself into people who haven't earned the right to witness you. You stop trying to be understood because you understand yourself. You let the gaps speak for you, the pauses, the presence. Because once you realize your attention is currency, you stop handing it out like pocket change. You invest it where it multiplies. And you begin to recognize your absence is worth more than your words. And the paradox, the moment you stop needing to be loved, you become magnetic. Because people don't crave what's eager to be seen. They crave what resists visibility. They crave what challenges their certainty. What keeps them guessing? What enters the room silently but shifts the temperature completely? You no longer try to be heard. You become the presence that makes others adjust their volume. So stop convincing people you're worthy. Stop negotiating your value. Stop offering your emotional wealth to people who haven't proven they can protect it. Hold your silence like a blade. Let your absence carry consequence. Let your calmness become pressure. Let your unpredictability become gravity. Because at the end of the day, Obsession doesn't chase the loudest voice. It chases the quietest power, the one who never begged to be seen, the one who was never fully there to begin with. And when you embody that, you don't just walk into rooms, you redefine them. Power without practice is fiction. You can read every book, memorize every quote, but if your movements don't change, your life doesn't either. So, now we move from theory to presence, from philosophy to precision. How do you make someone obsess over you without saying a word? Let's begin where most people lose themselves: availability. 1. Master the timing of your presence. Never show up when expected. Never reply when convenient. Never finish a conversation when it's still warm. Cut the scene short, right before the climax. Don't give them closure. Give them hunger. Let them stare at their phone, waiting for the message that never comes. Let them wonder, what were they about to say? Because what they imagine will haunt longer than anything you could have written. 2. Respond with precision, not emotion. They send a paragraph. You send a line. They say, "I miss you." You say, "I know." Emotionally neutral, not cold, just unreadable. Because when your responses are rare, they become sacred. When your tone is steady, they question every pause. Silence becomes suspense. Your words become thunder. 3. Control the mirror they see. People don't obsess over who you are. They obsess over how they feel about themselves around you. So reflect what they crave, but never let it settle. Make them feel chosen, then vanish. Make them feel interesting, then change the subject. Give them glimpses, never the full reflection. Let their ego inflate, then wonder why it deflates when you're gone. 4. Break their pattern. They expect warmth. Give a distance. They lean in. Pull back. They expect praise. Go silent. Be the anomaly. Be the fracture in their expectation. Because when they can't predict you, they can't protect themselves from you. And that breach in emotional defense, that's the entry point of obsession. 5. Use absence as a weapon. Don't block. Don't ghost. Just fade. Not dramatically. Subtly. Strategically. A longer pause here. A delayed reply there. A colder tone, no explanation. Let them feel the temperature drop. Make them wonder, did I say something wrong? Did I lose their attention? Was I too much? Let their own mind do the damage. Because absence doesn't just create longing, it creates self-doubt. And self-doubt always circles back to you. 6. Leave triggers behind. A phrase only, you say. A tone, a glance, a certain song, a particular scent. Anchor yourself in their subconscious. So even when you're not there, you're there. They hear your voice in other people's silence. They feel your energy in unfamiliar rooms. They compare every presence to your absence. You're not just a memory. You're a phantom, a psychic echo. This isn't manipulation. This is design. You're not forcing anyone to feel anything. You're becoming unavoidable. Your presence becomes contrast. Your absence becomes pain. And your energy becomes their emotional metric for everything else. You don't beg. You don't perform. You don't chase. You disrupt. You reframe. You haunt. And slowly, you stop being someone they talk to and become someone they dream about. Who you become when you stop hazing. Once you stop explaining yourself, once you stop offering your presence like a gift, Once you stop needing to be understood, you begin to evolve. You become something else, someone else. Not colder, not crueler, but centered, precise, undeniable. This is the new face of power. It doesn't chase. It doesn't explain. It doesn't ask to be seen. It commands space without saying a word. And when that shift happens, everything changes. You no longer bleed your energy for attention. You no longer throw your words to the wind hoping someone will catch them. Your silence becomes heavy. Your stillness, magnetic. Your distance, defining. Not because you're hiding, but because you've stopped performing, you've stopped proving, you've stopped overgiving. You've understood the deepest law of presence. What is scarce is sacred, and what is calm becomes unshakable. The weak are always talking, always apologizing, always trying to fix the impression they left behind. But the powerful, they move, and the world adjusts. You become the one they can't figure out. The one who walks away mid-conversation, not in rudeness, but in rhythm. You leave before it's finished, because they should chase the ending, not expect it. You give them glimpses of vulnerability, never the full manuscript. You feel deeply, but reveal selectively. You let silence carry meaning, because your silence is no longer emptiness. It's control. And then it happens. You stop being a person they once knew. You become the standard, not someone they scroll past. Someone they measure all future connections against and quietly admit nothing else feels like them. You become the phantom of a higher presence, a storm trapped in stillness, a mirror that shows them who they could have been, but only when you were near. And now that you're gone, they don't miss you. They miss who they were. Around you, this is what Machiavelli hinted at. Not dominance through cruelty, but reverence through restraint. The more unpredictable you become, the more space you occupy, the less you explain, the more powerful your silence becomes. You don't post more. You don't overshare. You simply carry yourself with such intentional absence that your name lingers in rooms you've never entered. You've become a mirror. And when you pull away, they don't just lose you. They lose the reflection of their better self. And here's what no one tells you. You don't become unforgettable by being kind. You don't become desired by being available. You become powerful when you no longer need to show up because your absence is louder than their presence. You're not just someone they remember. You're the question they never resolved, the silence they keep checking, the echo they can't outrun. You've become their phantom standard, their internal contrast, their quiet undoing, not because you demanded it, but because you withdrew at the right time. By now, they don't even realize what's happening to them. They just feel it. A tightening in the chest when your name comes up. A slow panic when your message never arrives. A flush of adrenaline when your presence flickers back, then vanishes again. They think they miss you, but that's not it. What they're addicted to is the emotional instability you designed. They've entered a loop, a psychological trap, and the most brutal part, they built it themselves. It starts with tension. You give them warmth briefly. You let them feel special, seen, touched. Then you pull away. No explanation, no warning, just silence. Not loud silence, surgical silence. And that's when the cycle begins. They reread your messages, scroll through your photos, play back your tone in their mind like a song they can't skip. You didn't say you were upset. You didn't say anything. And that's the point, because silence is the stage where obsession writes its script. They start chasing ghosts. Not you, but the version of themselves they only accessed when you were near. With you, they felt chosen. Without you, they feel replaceable. That contrast isn't heartbreak, it's identity fracture. You became the source of meaning, of status, of emotional elevation. Now your absence is not an inconvenience. It's a threat. They don't love you. They need you to feel like the version of themselves they liked most. That's not seduction. That's architecture. You're no longer a person. You're a trigger, a voice in their head, a shadow over their new conversations. They hear your silence in someone else's delay. They see your reflection in strangers' eyes, but it never matches. It never echoes the feeling you gave them. You didn't break them. You rewired them. You replaced their definition of connection with you. Now they spiral, craving your warmth, fearing your withdrawal, blaming themselves for your silence, hoping for one more moment, and unraveling every time you don't give it. This isn't chaos. It's a system, a psychological ecosystem that runs without your effort. You don't need to chase, or explain, or perform. You just stay unavailable enough to keep their mind in motion. And here's what makes this permanent. Even if they try to move on, they won't find peace. Because you're not a memory. You're a feeling they can't recreate. Everything else feels too soft, too clear, too safe. You taught them what desire feels like when it walks the edge of danger. You redefined intensity. Now nothing else burns the same. That's not romance. That's legacy. They'll talk about you, vaguely. Defend you to others, without clarity. Scroll through your silence, looking for signs. Because obsession doesn't thrive on love. It feeds on unfinished stories. You never gave them the ending. And that is exactly why they can't put the book down. At some point, you stop being a person to them. You become a presence, a pattern, a projection, a story they keep telling not because it ended well, but because it never truly ended. And that's the moment obsession evolves into something else, mythology. Machiavelli understood this long before modern psychology gave it a name. He didn't just influence minds, he inhabited them, not through repetition, but through absence. Not by giving answers, but by becoming the question. He knew, to control people indefinitely, you don't stay in their lives. You stay in their imagination. He didn't demand loyalty. He designed it. He crafted a presence so elusive that even in silence, his power remained intact. You do the same. By becoming rare, you become revered. By never offering resolution, you become etched into memory. This is legacy. Not the kind that fills headlines, but the kind that buries itself in someone's emotional architecture. Every person you've ever made feels something unforgettable: shame, desire, confusion. Hunger now carries your echo. And echoes don't fade. They deepen. Every new connection they chase, they compare it to you. Not because you were perfect, but because you were unresolved. You were warmth with restraint, presence with distance, desire with silence. They could never pin you down, so they pinned you into their psyche. Here's how you complete the transformation. 1. Speak in symbols. Don't narrate your pain. Encode it. Not, I had a rough childhood, but I learned early that silence keeps people alive. Not, I've been betrayed, but some people teach trust by breaking it. Let them interpret. Let them project meaning onto your shadows. 2. Let others define you and never correct them. They say you're distant, Let them. They say you're cold, unreadable, intense. Let them. Every label becomes a brushstroke in the myth they're building around you. And the moment they begin defending you to others, your myth is no longer yours. It's theirs to protect. 3. Make your values invisible but immovable. Don't declare I only respect loyalty. Let your absence after betrayal say it louder. Don't say I hate shallow talk. Let your eyes glaze over when it starts. Those who align with your rhythm will adjust. Those who don't will remember you as the standard they failed to reach. You're not punishing them. You're calibrating the room without sound. 4. Don't offer closure. Offer mystery. When they ask, why did you pull away? Say, some connections weren't meant to be explained. When they ask, what are you thinking? Say, you wouldn't believe me if I told you. And leave. In that gap, you grow bigger than life. You become a symbol, not a sentence. Then, it happens. You stop hearing from them. But others mention your name. People you barely remember. Quote, you. Strangers watch you too long. Not out of desire, but out of confusion. Out of memory. You've crossed over. From human to reference. They don't say, I knew them. They say, I can't forget them. Because you're not just someone they lost. You're the echo that followed them out of the room. You're the silence in their favorite song. You're the shadow in the mirror when the light shifts and the voice returns, the voice they thought they buried. You're not someone they used to know. You're someone they never stopped carrying. And no matter how far they run, they'll always wonder, why couldn't I keep them? Why does their silence still haunt me? Because you were never the one to be held. You were the one they almost had and never will again. Obsession doesn't peak when they want you. It peaks when they fear losing you. Not losing the relationship, not the daily texts, but losing the version of themselves they only accessed when you were near. That fear, quiet, creeping, unspoken, is the final weapon. It doesn't scream. It whispers, in the back of their mind, in the quiet hours, in the hollow silence, after your name is mentioned once. You gave them a role, the only one who sees me, the one who unlocks the real me. And then you left, not with anger, not with drama, but with elegance, with timing, with design. And now, the fear sets in. Did I lose them? Did I disappoint them? Were they always this far ahead of me and I never saw it? You say nothing. You don't clarify. You let the silence tighten like thread around the part of them still trying to make sense of you. And the human mind, it will fight harder to avoid loss than to gain anything new. You've become the emotional gravity they don't know how to resist and can't afford to detach from. But this fear must be elegant, almost sacred. You don't punish. You don't threaten. You don't accuse. You reward discipline with glimpses. You reward loyalty with subtleties. You reward presence with stillness. And in doing so, you teach them something they'll never forget. My presence is a privilege, not a promise. This fear rewrites how they act around you. They edit themselves. They calibrate their tone. They hesitate where they once interrupted. Not because you forced them to, but because they can't afford to lose you again. You are no longer a person. You are a mirror reflecting the version of themselves they fear never becoming again. And to lose you would mean losing that reflection forever. So you never have to raise your voice. You never have to explain. You never have to ask for devotion. Because now, they seduce themselves trying to win back what they think they lost. They imagine your silence as punishment, your distance as judgment, your unpredictability as a test. And their entire emotional world revolves around not being erased from yours. That's not manipulation. That's gravity. Unspoken, irresistible. And once you become someone they fear losing, you never need to chase again. They'll do it for you. Because now, they're not chasing love. They're chasing control, safety, redemption, a second chance at something you never even said was ending. And that's the final weapon, the fear of never being enough to reach you again. You were never just someone they loved. You were someone they couldn't figure out. Someone they almost had, almost touched, almost understood. And it's the almost that keeps them trapped. You didn't break them. You revealed them to themselves. You showed them the version of who they could be, but only in your presence. The confident one, the seen one, the powerful one. That version lived in the mirror you held up and then took away. And that mirror wasn't made of glass. It was built from silence, from restraint, from unpredictability. That's what they miss. Not your smile, not your words, not your warmth. They miss the feeling of being close to something rare and not knowing if they'd ever touch it again. Because most people are replaceable. Most presence fades with time. Most connections dissolve in noise and memory. But not you. Because not all presence is created equal. Some people fill space. Others leave echoes. You became the latter because you never gave them the ending. And now they live in the middle of a story only you could finish but never will. They don't remember what you said. They remember what your silence did to them. They don't recall the last conversation. They replay the moment it ended too soon. Too sharp. Too precise to be accidental. Even when you say nothing, they hear you. Even when you're gone, they search for traces. Even when they hold someone else's hand, they measure the weight against yours. You've become the quiet truth they'll never fully tell. The invisible benchmark they'll deny still haunts them. The name they stopped saying out loud but never stopped repeating inwardly. Because power doesn't live in performance. It lives in imagination. And the most dangerous thing you can become is not desired but mythologized. You were never chasing love. You were becoming a legend. Quietly, strategically, completely. And now that they can't let you go, you never need to return. Let the silence finish what the words began. And walk away, like someone who was never just a person, but a presence they'll never replace. Fade to black. End of game. End of them. Not you.